Well, so excited to have all of you guys on this topic today. We're going to talk about quality of hire, why it's important, how to measure it, where to start with it if you're not using it today. And so I've got some fantastic guests on the show. So we've got Kaylene Fedor, who's the senior manager of recruiting at Enveda. She's super awesome, has a lot of great insight, and is doing some really great stuff at her company. We've got Emma McBrier, who's the director of talent acquisition at Entrada, and she's always a fun guest to have on. She's always got a great joke or a great story or something exciting, something crazy that happened. And then, last but not least, Mr. Colton Richins, who's the head of people at Blueberry Pediatrics. And he's just going to pull something, out of his pocket that you've never seen before, and you're going to be really excited about it. So thank you guys for having this discussion with me today. Appreciate it.
Could be in song form too. You never know.
Okay. I like
I'm
that.
looking forward to that.
If at the beginning of this podcast, we have a new jingle for Rev Talent, Colton said that he was going to build it. So now we kind of might hold you to that, Colton, since you're super musically inclined. But all right, so let's talk about this for a second. So one of probably the most important metrics in hiring for companies is quality of hire, but it's almost are really challenging metrics for so many companies. And I think the last podcast that Emma and Kaylene, we discussed a little bit about I went to a LinkedIn conference, and the majority of the companies weren't measuring quality of hire, didn't know how to measure quality of hire. And so it was almost like, hey, we should probably talk about this and see if we can be helpful for people in this space. I've watched a number of different YouTube videos on quality of hire, and none of them are super great. So with you guys on here today, I think we'll be able to dive into some really great stuff. So just to kick it off, guys, are you guys measuring quality of hire today? And if so, how are you measuring it? Let's just start right there.
The short answer is yes. Enveda is tracking a multitude of metrics. One obviously being quality of hire. And I would categorize the quality of hire within just the recruitment process in general, and then post-hire. Post-hire would be, how did the people that we brought in, how are they performing? And then how is our recruiting process doing in general? So those are the two buckets I would put quality of hire. Specifically at Enveda, we talk about CTQs, or those are critical to quality metrics. And we have two. They are that the people that are in the screening stage, so 25% or less of candidates should go from the screening stage to the interview process. And then 25% or more of candidates in the interview process should go to offer. So as an example, if you have 8 people in the pipeline, the recruiter has interviewed 8 people, maybe the hiring manager has interviewed 5 out of those 8. Ideally, only 2 out of that total 8 should go to the interview process. And then out of the 2 that are in the interview process, 1 obviously will get an offer. And if I use that example, it would be 25% or less went on to interview, and over 25% or more, or in this case, 50% went on to get an offer. So you might ask yourself, what is CTQ actually measuring? And it's measuring a lot of things, but one of the things I tell hiring managers is it's measuring scrap. So if you think about recruiting like manufacturing, there's scrap that's involved, scrap being hiring managers' time, interviews time, maybe you've flown candidates out. Some people talk about cost to fill as a metric. And so this metric, the CTQ, is one proxy to scrap, or what we've, all the stuff, the time, the money that it takes to bring a candidate in. So that's one way that we do it. And then on the other bucket, quality to hire, it's how well did the candidate do that became a hire a year out. I wouldn't advocate anybody looking at earlier than a year, because your first 3 months are onboarding, so it's kind of hard to measure. But in about a year, you can get a pretty good sense of how well your recruiting process did, if the person stayed, so retention, and then obviously their performance. And the last thing that I will mention is that, and I think what makes Enveda unique, is the Likert scale, or the way that we actually quantitatively review candidates is how we also review hires. So we have a 4-point Likert scale. At Invade, if we say someone's a 3, that's actually really good. That also makes sense if we think about performance. So if you say if someone's a 3 in their performance, we can actually correlate those numbers. Like, how did they score in the interview process versus how are they scoring, in their performance a year out? So that's how we do it in Inveda.
That's really cool. I like that. This is a really interesting topic, and I would even say it's a little controversial these days, because I was chatting with somebody that I had met a few years ago who started his own recruiting consulting company. He and I were chatting a couple of weeks ago on this very topic, and we were both sharing kind of frustrations around this quality of hire metric and who owns it. Is it owned by TA? Is it owned by the hiring manager? Is it owned by the executive? Like, who really does own quality of hire? I think it's a shared metric, and that's how we view it here at Blueberry. And like what Kaylene was saying, like there's this aspect of the quality of the hiring process. I feel like recruiting owns that hands down. Like, if you are making a poor hire and you trace that back to a poor recruiting process, then that is on us 100%. But there's also this element that is on the business as well. The business owns the hiring decision. I can tell you that there are candidates that I would have hired over other candidates that the hiring manager ended up hiring somebody else. I feel like I have a pretty good gut at times, with hiring decisions, and I've pushed back. And I said, I really think that we should hire this person here for X, Y, and Z reasons. But they say, you know what? No, I'm making the call here. I'm going to hire this person. So TA, we don't own that hiring decision. So there's that aspect of it. And then Kaylene had mentioned other parts about, like, there's training involved, like what's the quality of the training and what's the quality of the onboarding process. Like, those are other contributors to that quality of hire metric. So yeah, so in answer to what the question that you're asking, we do measure it. There's 2 parts to the way that we measure quality of hire. I feel like we're a startup, so we have few tools available to us. So simply, we have a survey that goes out after a 90-day ramp period. So every hiring manager is responsible. They work with me to build a 30, 60, 90-day plan for their new hires. Outline what are the expectations within those first 90 days. How do you know if you're on track within those first 90 days? And then the hiring manager gets a survey through Rippling asking, hey, how's it going? Would you hire this person again if you were given a second chance? And that right there gives us, I agree with Kaylene, it's very hard to understand just how high quality of a hire you've made after 90 days, but this at least gives us a pulse of how are they tracking. Like, I think there are some indicators within their first 90 days that will help you predict whether or not a year into their first year, they're going to make a great hire. And then we rolled out earlier this year a very robust performance evaluation process. I really like what Kaylene's doing, like having their performance criteria consistent with their TA scorecards. I might have to like work that into our performance evaluation framework. But so we have like everybody on one sheet where we can see, after going through our in-depth performance evaluation process, you can see we have a grading scale of, does not meet, developing, performing, and excelling. That's our our performance grading framework. And so we can pull up every single team and say, okay, like, let's look at our new hires within their first year, and nobody gets rated for their performance until they've been with the company for at least a year. And then they fall into this evaluation process. And we can take a look at all of the new hires that fit into that criteria on a given team and say, okay, relative to their peers, are they performing? Are they excelling? Or are they developing? Or does not meet expectations? And then, of course, like for us, do we need to exit that person from the business if they're not meeting expectations? And it just helps us reevaluate and then ask all sorts of different questions around like what went well, what did not go well in terms of like making that hire.
I like that. Colton, I think you just said something really important. If you aren't, anyone listening, if you're not measuring quality of hire today, send a survey at 3 months or 6 months and just ask, would you hire them again? Like, I think that is the simplest way. If you don't have anything in place and you want to start, just send a survey at whatever time frame you determine. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year. And if they say no, then go meet with them and understand why. Because quality of hire, there's leading indicators and then there's lagging indicators, and quality of hire is a lagging indicator. It is something that tells us that earlier, if we don't have a quality of or a quality hire, then that means we need to go fix something earlier in our process. But if it isn't a quality hire, you have to investigate it further. Was it onboarding that made them not a quality hire? They turned over in 2 weeks. Was it their recruiting process? Did we miss something in how we were interviewing them? So I just want to start by saying that that isn't how we measure it, but I think it is the simplest way, and any TA leader can do it and put it into place literally today. At Entrada, how we measure quality of hire is 2 things. It's a 2-part measurement. Did they retain in their first 6 months? And did they score a developing, succeeding, or exceeding rating at their performance review, which we do at mid-year and annual? If they turned over before, we didn't even keep them for 6 months, that's a problem. That tells me they weren't a quality hire. And if they're underperforming after 6 months or even 2 months, right? Like, no one should be underperforming right after they start, then they weren't a quality hire. So we look at those 2 data points, and on our team, we conduct monthly turnover reviews. So we are line data looking at every person and asking these questions on a monthly basis. So we definitely track it. We care a lot about quality of hire, but that in short is how we're measuring it at Entrada today.
Awesome.
It's interesting, similarities across the 3 of you and how things are measured, but also some big differences, right? So, Kaylene, you talked about performance and retention. Colton, you had hiring manager feedback and performance, and then Emma, you have retention and performance similar to Kaylene. So it's interesting, those components that are there. You can go and find a ton of data about a variety of different attributes that you can look at in terms of indicators that you could potentially use. There's other things like 360-degree feedback scores you could use. There's customer service scores. There's like promotion rates. There's a variety of other things that you could potentially use. But you could also go way off track and get way crazy, and it becomes meaningless. So I actually think that the 3 things that you guys talked about, performance, retention, and hiring manager feedback, is really crucial to being able to do this. The other thing that really kind of popped into my mind as you guys were talking is that this is kind of a shared metric between talent acquisition and the business. And that is also kind of a rubbing point with business leaders at different companies, that they'll say, oh, this is talent acquisition. This is not us. This is you. What are you guys' thoughts on that? And how do you kind of change that conversation to become more of a partnership and helping people that feel like they want to put the blame on one group or the other? Yeah, I mean, recruiting can put the same blame on hiring managers, right? So how do you guys think about that? And is there an opportunity to kind of try to bring that relationship together so it's a shared, aligned agreement versus maybe an expectation that one party has or another?
Yeah. There's a lot that we could talk about on this question. I think that for me, it all comes down to alignment of intent. We are very mission driven, and so we always lean on that when starting conversations. Like, our goal is to further pediatric telemedicine, and making like that the focal point of our conversation, and knowing that there are going to be 2 different sides with 2 different opinions. We all have a shared goal here. And one thing that helps us to recalibrate and realign ourselves is to be focusing on data and making sure that we are, I guess, telling the right story. Because in all honesty, like, there are so many variables that influence the quality of hire story. So it's important that you're considering the right elements, right? The data that starts the conversation for us comes from our hiring manager post-hire feedback surveys and subsequent performance evaluation data. But from there, you can look at many, many other data variables to inform your story and your recommended action. Like for example, if data from your survey and performance evaluations suggests that you made a poor hiring decision, there's a number of questions that you should ask yourself first, right? Number one, who is their manager? Are they an experienced manager? Are they a new manager? What do the engagement scores of that team look like? Is the manager building a culture that is getting the most out of their people? Because in all reality, people are less likely to perform in poor environments. Number two, like how clear are performance expectations? Does the new hire know what success looks like? Are they clear on the performance outcomes for which they're responsible? Do they understand the inputs that will get them there? So on and so forth. We already talked about this, but like, what does the recruiting process look like? You should compare. And I think this is, again, like going back to Kaylene, this is where what she recommended is a really great suggestion. You should compare where they are falling short with the competencies that you outlined at the beginning of the recruiting process. And if where they're falling short isn't consistent with the selection criteria, you hired for the wrong role. So these are some of the questions that I feel help calibrate two different groups together. At the end of the day, it's like it is telling the right story, and it's focusing on the right inputs that are ultimately going to move the business further or move our mission further. It's my 2 cents.
I like what Colton mentioned about data. When you can pull data and have a conversation based off of data, then it's not speculative, and you can make some pretty good inferences if you're finding that, you know, somebody is struggling or a cohort is struggling under, say, a certain hiring manager. You make some inferences off that if you have, again, the right data. But to answer your question, Jeremy, very short-windedly, I always say hiring is a team sport. And I consistently say that through my trainings, my Slack messages, my one-on-ones with hiring managers. It is a team sport. And if you consistently hear that, then you start to embody that when you're thinking about hiring decisions and, you know, getting your 30, 60, 90-day plans together. And, you know, did the candidate do the survey? And, you know, what was the Glassdoor reviews? I mean, all the things that trickle down from that, you're acculturated into that philosophy. So that is, if we talk about the easiest thing that a hiring manager, a team, or a company can do, hiring is a team sport.
Kaylene, I just preach louder for all the people on LinkedIn and whoever needs to hear that. Like, that to me is the most important thing. And I feel really lucky that I have an executive team that shows up that way. I mean, our CEO built his whole C-suite. Like, he did it. We didn't go through a bunch of search firms. I mean, I worked with him, but like, he really took that on and understanding like his team is his team and he owns it, and he expects all of the leaders at Entrada to own it. And so I do think that that's really critical. To your question though, Jeremy, I don't think every company is like that. I've been at companies that aren't like that, and it is hard. Like, the heat comes down on the talent leaders and their function. And so when bad quality shows up, or we find out someone turned over too early, or, you know, however it is that you're measuring it, they said no on the survey, I wouldn't rehire them. I do think if you can, and this obviously depends on your business, but like, meet with that manager and pull up the feedback forms from the candidate and say like, look, let's read these together, because this wasn't me. I didn't write this. This is what your team wrote about this person. So, like, to both of your guys' point, where did we miss? Let's compare why you're saying this person isn't working, and let's look at the leading indicator, which is your interview process, to see what happened. Sometimes though, and this is like not uncommon of what I've seen, they nailed it in the interviews and they totally crushed the process that we put them through. But then we come to find out their equipment was late, and so they didn't have a good first day. The manager didn't quite have the 30, 60, 90 ready. And there's other things that influence somebody retaining with the business. We found out later they had competing offers at the time that we made the offer. And so did my team like vet that out? So there's so many different things that can come up when it comes to quality of hire, which I think is part of the reason people don't want to measure it, because it is a time-intensive metric to keep up with. And if you're going to start talking about it, you better be ready to start putting action behind it. And so I think that's maybe one of the reasons why it becomes intimidating. But something I thought was interesting on your first question is Colton and Kaylene and myself were like talking about how we're measuring it. I think you have to work with what your business is giving you when it comes to how you're going to measure it. My business gives me performance reviews twice a year. So I'm going to use that in how I'm measuring quality. Colton is at a startup. And so he doesn't have some of those things in place. So he's sending a survey. So I think as a talent leader, if you're going to approach starting to measure your quality of hire, clearly there isn't like a one way to do this. And so look at your business and what's working and align with your leadership team on like, what do they care about? When you say quality of hire, what do they want to know? And then try to figure out how you can back into a metric from there.
I feel like a lot of companies preach a culture of continuous learning and improvement. And I think that if you have that as a company value, you can lean into that value to create some shared learnings every single hiring mistake. Like we have a habit of writing up a postmortem after every, not just hiring miss, but for every miss that we have at the company, we write up a postmortem because it helps us to learn as a group, because most of our decisions have cross-functional implications. So we can all benefit from writing up a postmortem to better understand how we can apply the failures from one hiring process into the next one to not repeat the mistake.
You know, it's interesting. I think as you guys are implementing this across your businesses, and you're saying, all of you are saying we measure it just a little bit differently, that's probably okay to do, right? Like, and you're probably just measuring against yourself as a company versus there's not like a standard out there, a universal standard in the market to say, okay, we're going to measure ourselves against this standard because of exactly what you guys just described, right? It doesn't exist. So you have to kind of start somewhere and then measure it against yourself. And then over time, are you getting better? Are you using those postmortems that Colton's talking about and seeing, okay, we learned from this, so we're going to adjust this, and is it getting better now? I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. How are you as TA leaders or HR leaders and your recruiters, how are they utilizing quality of hire to kind of tell the story to the business utilizing data?
This is a good question. I think my recruiters aren't necessarily using it. I would say I'm using it more than they are when I do like weekly recruiting updates before executive staff. So that's like the cadence that I follow. And really, I would say we're only, maybe this is not a great answer, but we're really only addressing it if we're seeing problems. Otherwise, peachy keen, keep on going. So how we've been looking at it and talking about it is, hey, these teams are crushing it. And so I try to use great teams as like case studies. What are they doing? Why are they doing so well? And then looking at teams that maybe aren't, and we're seeing a lot of turnover. We had a team a couple of months ago that we were seeing a lot of turnover early on. It's kind of high volume, churn and burn. And we thought that there's a way that we can kind of get through this. Let's look at what other teams are doing and what's the key differentiators between the teams that are having a lot of success in their quality of hire and teams that aren't. And again, a lot of factors go into that. The role we're looking at, the comp we're paying, what the market's requiring. This employment market is different than anything I've ever seen at the moment. So trying to adapt to that. But I think how we're using it is really just addressing where we're seeing those spikes and issues. And then taking a moment to like meet with those leaders. And I actually work really closely with the business partners anytime that I'm seeing spikes or issues to understand, like, is there more here that I don't know? Because I'm looking at it from the talent lens, but I don't know everything that might be going on within that team. Maybe there's org changes coming, leadership changes, restructures, things like that. And so I lean really heavily on my business partners when I identify issues. But other than that, it's really just a heartbeat metric that's like, hey, here's how we're doing on our quality of hire. Couple spikes in these teams are crushing it. Want to make sure you guys know they're really great at hiring, so be more like them.
I'll add to what Emma said. At Inveda, we review every single role we close, and what we call role retrospectives. So if you see one of those in your calendar, you know you're going to meet with me or one of the recruiters. And typically when you get a calendar invite from a recruiter or TA leader, you're like, oh, it's like HR mumbo jumbo. So the first thing that I would say, if anybody's listening who wants to adopt this role retrospective, is to make sure that you're celebrating your hiring team or hiring manager. There is a reason why there's a TA team. There's subject matter expertise that goes along and strategy that goes along with building your company and your talent ops. And so for a lot of people coming in, you know, it's, you know, hiring managers specifically, it's a lot to do. So I always come to the table with enthusiasm and excitement. And it goes back to my philosophy that hiring is a team sport. So it goes a little something like this. We have a meeting, it's 30 minutes. I congratulate you on the hire. And now we're going to talk about a couple metrics. The first one, as I mentioned, are CTQs, first and foremost. I go over the definitions again, why we're measuring it. So it's not just like, we just do this because we do this, but we do this because there's a reason. And there's a lot of valuable insights in these CTQs. And then we'll talk about other metrics. Of course, time to fill is one of them. Of course, we talk about diversity. We also talk about the quality of the interviewers. So within our dashboards, I can tell who is a quote unquote good interviewer or not so good. And so we can evaluate the team as well to see maybe who would be you know, somebody we'd want to add to the interview panel, like in the next round. So anyway, there's all these different metrics that we chat about within this 30 minutes, and it gives the chance for the hiring manager to understand the TA world, understand the philosophies, the why, and to get better consecutively. So if it's a knock it out of the park role, we celebrate it and we say, hey, just do more of this. And if it didn't go so well, still a little bit of celebration, but then there's an opportunity to communicate where we can move the needle in terms of the metrics that are actually important.
Awesome. I don't know that I have anything else to add on top of what Kaylene and Emma said. That's a great answer.
No, you're good, Colton. And like, let's double click into just metrics in general for just a second. There's a lot of metrics in talent acquisition and a lot of metrics that leaders care about or don't care about, but maybe some metrics can just become distracting. And what are you guys seeing in terms of metrics that leaders are requiring that actually just distracting in order to be more successful in the hiring process? What are you guys experiencing out there?
A lot of opinions on this one. I think we are all very opinionated here. I'm going to call attention to one that is the most glaring to me and is also painful to me right in this moment. And it is time to hire.
Ooh.
Whether you're looking at average time, median time, whatever it is, time to hire, because not all requisitions are created equal. And I had a talent leader in my network. I talked to her about, you know, how do you manage it, you know, your leadership team that's like, oh my gosh, your days are at 50. What are you going to do? Like, recruiting's in the tank. You've got to turn it around. And she did a really interesting thing with her team where she assigned essentially the difficulty level to every requisition. Mm-hmm. And each of those, based on, you know, whatever the average difficulty level is of all the open requisitions, is how long people could expect the time to fill to take or to be open. But the reason I think this is such a distracting metric in general is if you have brand new roles to the business, expect them to take longer. Managers don't always know, you know, what they're asking for if that exists in the market. And so part of it is they're going to the recruiting team to help them understand the market, and they're adapting as they're, you know, meeting with candidates. We would love for every single role to come to our desk to be perfectly thought through, and we know exactly how many candidates we have in the market that we can go target and go get, but it's just not realistic. And the worst thing a manager can do is make a hire out of desperation. You can have a super, super fast time to fill if you're making desperate hires, but you're going to be turning them over. You're paying for that, the training, the effort, the onboarding. And so I am a huge proponent of take the time you need, reasonable time you need, of course. And my recruiting team works with them on that, but take the time you need to get the right hire. And I really try hard to work with my recruiting team to train them on understanding when a manager is in desperation and how to work with them through that. Kaylene, you made a really great call out. Like a lot of the times in recruiting, we're like hyping up our leaders. We're giving them confidence. Like we know what we're doing, so you can rely on us. We're going to rely on you for your knowledge in this specific industry and space. But I just really feel so strongly that time to fill is an important metric to look at and be managed, but it is not the leading metric to make a decision on if your recruiting team's being effective or not.
I could not agree more. It's funny because, oh my gosh, you took the words right out of my mouth. And before I got onto this call, I was thinking about all of like the vanity metrics out there, and I'm like, will I be like, put up against a wall and thrown tomatoes at if I say time to fill? Because I feel like everyone's like, oh, time to fill, time to fill, time to fill. And I'm like, I hate time to fill. I think time to fill is absolutely one of those distracting metrics. And I'd actually be interested to know if time to fill is that other people would consider it as crucial of a metric as it was back when companies were like hiring at all costs without consequences, because we're in a very different time now where it isn't all about hiring at all costs. It is about quality over speed. And I work at a startup, and it's great to hear that like Entrada has that mindset too, because sometimes I'm like, is that just a startup mentality? Because we don't want to just rush people into seats. Like we have very limited budget to spend on hiring, and so every hire that we make counts. And if we make the wrong hire, it comes at a great cost. And so we take our time. Like Emma said, I use time to fill as more of a way to set expectations with hiring managers than a true indicator of how the function performs, if that makes sense. For example, like a product manager, I know like from my career in recruiting that it could take me, product could take up to 90 days to fill. But that's just like hey, let's just, if you know you need to hire somebody in product and you want that person in seat by January, well, it usually takes, 60 to 90 days to fill a product manager. So we should open that up now, but then forget time to fill after that. Then let's just like get to work and make sure that we're making the right hire. Thank you for saying that, Emma.
We will band together.
That's right. Destroy it. One recruiter at a time. The last thing that I'll say, there's just a funny story. One of my old direct reports called me out of the blue one day, and he was asking me, he was in an interview process for a recruiter role at some company, and they had asked, I don't even know what the metric, I don't remember the metric. I'd never heard of it before, but the company was like, hey, they want to know what my stat is in this. And I was like, what is that? Like, I've never even heard of that. I went and Googled it, and I remember like calling him back and saying, you need to ask this company why they want to track this, because this to me has nothing to do with recruiting performance or business performance. Like, what, you might not want to go with that company.
You have to get back to us on what that metric was, because now I'm dying.
Yeah.
I'll text him and find out. But it was crazy. I had never heard of it before.
Yeah.
I'm gonna piggyback off of Emma and Colton, and I'm in the club. I think time to fill is horrible when agencies reach out and say, we can help you fill roles. Our time to fill is X. I'm like, ugh, like it has no correlation to quality of hire, which was what we're talking about today. But anyone listening, I would say, if you are going to think about time to fill, think about it as a proxy for candidate experience. And specifically, I mean, how long are your candidates staying in the individual stages of your interview process?
Yes.
So if you see that a candidate is in, an HR screen for 30 days, that doesn't say maybe as much about the recruiting process as it does the agency that the hiring manager has, or the will for them to fill the role. We always say at Inveda, we'll move recruiting as fast as you want us to move, hiring manager, as fast as you want to move. So I would say, filling a role, how quickly, it's to set expectations, but if you are going to look at it as a proxy for candidate experience and ghosting as a metric.
I also think that, well, I love this club we just started, by the way. This is a great club and I'm happy to be in it. But another metric that I find like spicy to talk about, and I'm like curious your guys' experience with this, is also offer acceptance rate. Because I have had like the craziest experience. It was like 95%, between 95 and 98% at one point. And that was too high. We weren't going for hard enough talent. And then it dropped to like 82%, and that was too low. And I was like, but what do you guys want? Like there is reason behind all of it. If we go too hard, like then, and we're losing candidates, that's bad, all of these things. And so I always like to remind my leaders too, like, especially being part of a software company, you guys work with the product, and product is very predictable. Human beings are the most unpredictable product that you can work with because we cannot control anything they do. We can try our best, we can send them swag, we can like communicate, and we can, you know, make a great experience for them during their interview process. The recruiter's basically best friends with them at the end, but they could still not show up one day. And that has nothing to do with how hard the recruiting team worked or how hard even the manager worked to keep them on board. And so I always find offer acceptance rate, I've kind of like tried to pull back from that metric to obviously look at it and dissect if we're losing candidates, especially if there's like a theme somewhere. But this one is also another one that I find kind of spicy, but how do you guys talk about it, or has this ever come up for you guys?
Spicy. I like the word.
I like that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what we were talking about with time to fill, in that like you can use it to inform the dialogue with your leaders, but offer acceptance is the exact same. Like we'll take, if somebody says no to an offer, we use that as a point of discussion. Why did they say no? And if it's within our control, then it prompts meaningful discussion. Like, what can we change in order to not lose out talent for this reason in the future? But if it's outside of our control, or if it falls outside of like our principles or philosophies, then it's like, okay, well, like chalk that up and move on. Like, you know, there are some candidates out there that are coming from companies that pay in the 80th percentile, and most of the companies that I'm familiar with anchor to the 50th percentile. So great, yeah, like if you're getting competing offers for 50K above what we're paying here, like, sorry, like that we're not going to budge our philosophy. But that's not the recruiter's fault. Like, if the recruiter's losing candidates because they have a competing offer that paid 50K more, but you go to leadership and they're like, well, this is our philosophy, we're not moving. Great. Then we don't need to talk about that anymore. But there are other things you might lose talent on. Maybe it's like there's a breakdown in the recruiting process. Maybe, to Kaylene's point, maybe a candidate is sitting in stage for like 3 weeks and then they get an offer and it's like, yeah, this wasn't the best experience. It wasn't.
We're never going to say yes.
Yeah, like, no thanks. I'm going to go with this other company who gave me just this amazing recruiting experience. Well, then, yeah, that prompts some really meaningful discussion. But in no way do I feel like that the offer acceptance rate is totally controllable by the recruiter, and therefore I don't think that their performance should be on the hook for that one metric.
Mm-hmm.
Spicy.
We don't look at, we do measure acceptance rate. I would say the 2 times that I get concerned is when it comes to the candidate has not accepted due to salary or due to another offer. And I think that is correlated with a lack of transparency and discussion in the early stages of the hiring process. So if you've put in all that time and effort and have a robust interview process with a high quality candidate, and you get to the end of offer and they say no thanks, I think that is actually on the talent team, that they haven't had transparency on what was the salary range, what are your expectations, what makes sense for you from a total rewards perspective. A lot of times candidates are very nervous to bring those discussions up, and companies are naive enough to claim that's not important. And those total rewards is very important. And you know it when you get to the offer, that candidate's super excited, and then they'll say, thanks, but no thanks. Well, whatever happened to that? You forgot the other part of learning about the company is learning about the total rewards.
Yeah.
So that is it, an issue when I hear that a candidate doesn't accept because of salary. And then when there was another offer, again, I think early on the process, letting the candidate know, hey, here's where we're at in our search, and where are you at in your search? And if you're mid stage and there's another, offer on the table, or you're, late stage, let us know. Again, if you're talking to a quality candidate, those conversations matter, and they're really important, and it saves you from, all this time and effort you put into the hiring process, to then have a candidate decline.
Definitely.
You guys like boating? You guys go boating very often? Okay.
Are you offering?
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, we're gonna go. We're gonna team up. We're gonna,
This club
from Houston.
out boating.
We're gonna go. So I recently got like an older boat, and every boat has its issues, right? But all boats have kind of a dashboard on them with all these different metrics, right? And some of the metrics, if they go up or down, it doesn't matter that much, right? Like your gas tank, it's gonna, be at a certain level. If it gets really low, then you're in trouble, right? But there's, maybe your oil pressure, it falls within a certain range on there, and you're okay. I had an issue where the voltage on my dashboard was spiking. Anytime I pushed the throttle up forward, the voltage would go crazy, like 18, 19. It was supposed to stay at 14. And then it was causing like engine fault service required issues that make your boat, go into limp mode, and you can't even get it going, right? So I kind of think about all these talent acquisition metrics as, each of them are kind of important to have a view of, right? It's like, okay, some are going to go up and down, but it's only when they really start to get way out of whack that you need to kind of have your eyes on it and say, okay, this is really important. Like you guys talked a lot about like speed to hire, and you all kind of agreed, and I might be on a little separate party here. Like I do think speed of hire has its place, right? I agree with you guys that it's not the end all be all, but it is important, right? Because if you're trying to hire talent and it's taking 90, 120, 180, 365 days, that's a problem, right? That's a problem that's like dire, and your engine needs to be serviced. So, and I don't think you guys meant it in a way of like, it doesn't matter at all. It does matter, but it doesn't, it's not like the end all be all. You got to keep your eye on it and keep focused on it, and you need to diagnose it if it has issues or whatever. But in reality, like there are certain metrics on that dashboard that are probably more important than others. And it sounds like we're kind of aligned that at the end of the day, if you don't have a quality hire and you bring on just whoever, your engine is not going to run as a company. You're not going to be successful the way that you want to be. Like people make all the difference. I think, Kaylene, it's your chief people officer that talks about, what's his famous line that he always says about people?
People create all value.
People create all value. And he's 100% right? Like if Colton only has 3 hires that he can make, and he makes the wrong hires in those 3, 2 out of the 3, if they're great, he's probably going to be okay. But if he gets only 1 good hire out of 3, like that's going to probably be a really big problem for the company. So, long story short, like quality of hire is like getting quality people in is probably the most important thing you can do versus speed, versus offer acceptance, versus all these metrics that can be distracting. Like keep your eye on it on the dashboard, but like people just go way to one side or the other. Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate you playing devil's advocate there. And I guess for anybody listening that wanted to like understand that more, I'll give you an example of where time to fill might be an important metric to track. So, and Emma, I won't speak for you, but I'm going to use your team as an example. And if I'm off base, then you can correct me. But I know that Emma has like a leasing center, right, of high volume roles. So she probably has like multiple recruiters that are filling those high volume roles, and you could use time to fill as a performance, not necessarily like a business business metric, but maybe like a recruiting performance metric where you can say, okay, relative to your other recruiters, like how are you doing? If I have one recruiter that where it takes 90 days to fill a leasing center agent versus the other two recruiters who are doing it in 30 days, well, yeah, there you go. That prompts some discussion around what is this person doing wrong that could be addressed to better their performance or exit them from the business. So I still think
Yeah,
it's great.
I think you're right, Colton, and also appreciate the devil's advocate. You should track this metric. I hope that part wasn't like taken out of this. Everyone should track this metric. We do look at this metric. However, I think that it can be distracting when you show to your leadership team and they say, "Oh my gosh, it's been your average 50 days to fill our roles. You're slow." Well, now you're incentivizing me to hurry up.
Yeah.
And is that incentive the right way that you want? Is that what you really want to drive?
Yes.
Or do you want to understand why I've ticked up 10 days from last month?
Yeah.
And also, yeah, it's just tricky like that.
There's definitely a balance. And I think that every metric probably has its place within the overall TA story. And the way that you tell that narrative could depend on 100 different things. But I fully agree with Kaylene, like time and stage is a really great metric to track. That's like the substitute that you can use for time to fill to get to the same concerns. Yeah, but I do think that time to fill can still be very distracting and could create misaligned incentives. You know, if you've got your recruiters that are, if you're lighting a fire under them, then they're just going to be incentivized to fill the role as quickly as possible, which could put the wrong person in the role. So
I think that happens a lot. What Kaylene was saying of, time and stage, that happens a lot. And I don't think talent acquisition folks like go back to that and look and say, well, yeah, it's actually taken us a long time because you're asking us to do 19 interviews for one candidate or 27 interviews for one candidate. Or you're sitting and waiting on feedback for weeks at a time. Like, you're right. Our time to fill is getting killed. And here's what you can do to help us. In our team sport, this is where we need help from this part of the team to make it happen. And that is a very regular thing that happens, I think, at all companies. People are getting stuck in those different stages for sure.
Yeah, I think that going back to the most important message from this whole conversation is that hiring is a team sport. So Kaylene, thank you for bringing that up, because if you are in regular talks with the leaders that you are recruiting for or that you're partnering with on these hires, then if things are taking a long time, or like I alongside Emma, like I work with an amazing team who take full responsibility over their role within the hiring process. And if we're taking too long, they will be the first to admit, like, that's on me. Like, I'm not getting feedback in fast enough. I'll do better. Or X, Y, and Z, there could be other reasons. And then, if there's stuff that is waiting on me, like I'll own up to that. So as long as you have like really great partnerships with those with whom you are hiring, that is what's most important, because hiring is a team sport. And so like mapping that all back to quality of hire, you have the greatest chance of making a great hire if you are locked in with your hiring partners.
Yeah, I think just like a final thought on that too, when we're talking about quality of hire, we started the discussion with saying like, who owns the metric? And from my perspective, I think I own following the metric, and then I own putting flashlights and highlighting where it's not working and what's hurting.
Yep.
Sometimes that's for me to fix, and sometimes that's for my partners to fix. And that's why in talent, as leaders of talent, we have to be so well connected to our business so that when we go to them with these flashlights that might not always be so pretty, and show them data that tells a story that maybe they need to make some changes on occasion, that we can navigate those conversations effectively and not offensively. So it is a tricky one to navigate, but I do think that from my perspective, I am responsible for putting the flashlight where the issues are at and working with the people to get it fixed.
+1. Yeah, good comment.
Love that. Guys, this has been a good spicy discussion. I like it. I like it. Thanks for all of your participation and ideas and thoughts, and for letting me play devil's advocate. I was just kind of putting like my leader hat on for just a second, because I could see leaders be like, yeah, it's cool that you just want to hire quality, but like I've got a business to run and we've got to do this quickly, right? But I think how we talked about it, it is an important metric, but it's not the end all be all. What, in kind of the last like just couple minutes here, what would you guys say to companies that are wanting to implement quality of hire into their business? Where would you tell them to start?
I think Emma made a good comment earlier, and that's just, send out a survey, ask them if they'd make the hire again. That's the easiest thing that you can do. But maybe even before you get there, define what quality of hire means to you, because I'm sure businesses have different definitions of what quality of hire means. Maybe it's the top 10 percentile of candidates in that discipline, or maybe it's a cultural pillar. I don't know, maybe it's a balance of the two, but start there. Start like define what quality of hire means for your business, and then you can use a very simple survey to ask your hiring managers, would you make this hire again if you were given the choice? And then as you continue to grow, you can implement some of the much more robust techniques that Emma and Kaylene have talked about.
Jeff Bezos said, and I'm paraphrasing, that setting a high bar for hiring is the single most important element to Amazon's success. And if you can start with a philosophy like that and express that to senior leadership, then it's a lot easier for them to go, yeah, we'll invest in surveys and we'll invest in a TA team and we'll invest in blank. But you start high level, kind of almost like first principles thinking. And so I would start there. That is free. Being able to impart the wisdom, again, of our friend Jeff. If it's good enough for Amazon, I'm sure it's good enough for a startup listening, how important it is to have a robust hiring process, including thinking about things like quality to hire.
I think just starting out, if a company is beginning to think about measuring quality of hire, I mean, I echo just what both Kaylene and Colton said, like start by understanding what does that mean for your business. And I do think that a lot of the metrics we've talked about, like you do need to make sure as a talent leader, you have a lot of those heartbeat metrics, I'll call them, in place before you start attacking quality of hire. And I would say you need your recruiting process pretty solid before you start attacking quality of hire, because you may start to see there's issues, but you don't have a baseline to even build off of. So it is important that those things are in place before you begin. But if you feel like those things are in place and you're ready to begin, you can start really simple with the survey, or you can start assessing what your business has to offer that you can use as metrics to your benefit, and then kind of take it from there. But never start measuring something if you're not prepared to take action on it. That's just my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. The never-ending measurements of metrics that you have no idea what they mean, or you have no idea. Nobody's going to do anything with them. They don't mean anything.
Yeah.
There's no value. There's no value to that. Cool. You guys have provided such great insights, and just to keep it simple, like just keep this metric simple and just get started. I think that's the big thing too. Just start. Stop getting in analysis paralysis and trying to make it absolutely perfect, and just do something simple. So you all have been fantastic today. Thank you all so much for joining this quality of hire session. Appreciate it.
Thank you. See you on
Thanks,
the bus.
Jeremy. Thanks, Kaylene. Thanks, Colton. See you guys.
Yeah.